Messy and masterful. In this podcast, we speak about the success of people who have achieved, built, or done something amazing, special, remarkable, noteworthy, and/or fabulous. Think of presidents, doctors, chefs, architects, filmmakers, writers, philosophers, CEOs, journalists, and the list goes on of people who've had a genuine impact on this world. But rather than underlining their career victories, we speak about the challenges they needed to overcome to actually get there. In each episode, we discuss 3 of such challenges, obstacles, difficulties, and/or hurdles with our guest, putting the messy of their lives next to the masterful. A very warm welcome to you. My name is Alder Bab, and I'm so happy you could make it. So sit back, relax, and download the podcast here.
I assisted in the organization of 2 Belgian trade missions. I got an MBA. Yet when we came back to Belgium for holidays, people would always ask me, so what do you do all day? In the beginning, the people pleaser, I hear myself, over-explaining. And after a while, I got so fed up with it that I eventually started answering, nothing. I just drink cappuccinos all day long.
Yes, and a very good day to you. So happy you could make it for yet another episode of Messy and Masterful. And this episode is called The Headhunter. For this episode, we have a deep conversation about career choices, family life, and personal health with a professional negotiator and headhunter. And her name is Laurence Dewaele, and I speak to Laurence about her journey from being a lawyer at one of the top firms on the planet to becoming an expert in negotiation and executive search. We speak to Laurence about her upcoming book called Eat, Sleep, Negotiate, a book she co-authored with Katja Tieleman. And if you want to know more about this book, then you can check out our show notes, where a link to the book is available. So do check that out if you're interested in negotiation. For now, I hope you will enjoy this profound conversation with Laurence Dewaele, episode 69, The Headhunter. I am very excited about this interview because it's actually someone that I realized yesterday that I've already been friends with for, I think, around 20 years almost, Laurence. Can you imagine?
It has been 20 years. I realized the same thing, I'm afraid.
So we go back to the university days. And we know each other quite well. And so it's on one hand, I think it's great to have you as an interviewee. On the other hand, I was a little bit afraid because you know each other so well, it might be at the expense of our professionalism in this interview. So we're going to give it our best to have a conversation around your fascinating job, Laurence, because you are a headhunter.
Indeed.
And so, first of all, very warm welcome. I'm very excited you could be here, and that you're crazy enough to say yes to my invitation to have you as one of our guests. And then, in preparation for this interview, and I really loved you saying that, you kind of said about your job that it has taken you a bit of time to really kind of say. To be out as a headhunter, to basically tell the world, like, I'm so excited to be a headhunter. And I wanted to start there because let's start with, what you think and feel when you started this profession and why you think differently now.
Well, for sure, although if you would have asked me like 20 years ago when we first met, what my professional ambitions were, being a headhunter would not have been on my list. So That's absolutely true. I changed my career from being a lawyer to being a headhunter. And it really was a decision from the heart, not from the head. But, lawyers, they're not very capable of making decisions from the heart. So when people would ask me about my new job, I would even be stumbling a bit what it was about, almost feeling a little bit ashamed. And it was actually my husband who pointed it out to me. He said, "What is it, that makes you feel so conscious about, your change of career?" But after a couple of months, my story started sounding very different, with passion and enthusiasm about what I was doing, and especially why I was doing it. And that's what I hope to share with you today.
Yeah. So, so you're a lawyer by training. You have an extensive academic career path. Yeah, we're going to discuss your challenges because as one of your challenges, you did mention that you switched, and not entirely your choice to a certain extent, um, but you were quite going back 20 years in time, young Aldo and young Laurence. You were quite an ambitious person, and you were quite set on becoming a successful lawyer, were you not?
Yes, absolutely. I thought law was my career path, and that's what it would be for the rest of my life. That's what I had in mind back then.
Yeah. And you studied law in Leuven, right? And then you also went to King's College in London for a year. You did an LLM there, is that correct?
Yes, indeed. So I did my Erasmus in Paris, in France, at the Université René Descartes. And afterwards, I did my LLM at King's College in London.
Yeah. And so then there's this opportunity to work for a big law firm, DLA Piper, which is a globally renowned law firm. What were the first years there like? What was it like for you?
Well, basically, exactly as you can imagine, working really long hours and also getting great opportunities at a young age. They allowed me to do like a secondment in the office in Berlin. But there were also, a number of, I would say, maybe disappointments because, I really chose law because I was really attracted to the idea of giving a voice of those in need. In class discussions, I was always the one who took on the role as a facilitator, or when something needed to be obtained from the teachers, I was always put forward by the rest of the class. And to a certain extent, I was also attracted to the more theatrical aspect of being in court, with a gown, being able to convince a judge, real American style, with a very strong monologue. And all of that was there. But I also experienced, how polarizing lawyers can be. I'm a little bit, I would say, conflict avoidant by nature. And the sharp language you use as a young lawyer, because you copy also what you see from the more senior people, it often seemed to make clients even more convinced of their own case, digging deeper into their own rights. And I had really looked forward towards the pleading in court, but in reality, I find myself struggling a bit with the way both sides presented the case in an extra one-sided manner, thereby maybe dismissing a really constructive dialogue as an alternative. But you know what? Despite these thoughts, I continued working in the law firm, and I got really encouraged by the positive feedback and the great work evaluations. And there were many, many aspects I enjoyed doing as well.
Yeah. So this was corporate law that you
Yes.
were specializing in, right? So I can imagine these are loads of contracts, loads of kind of negotiation. And we'll get back to negotiation later on in this interview because you have a special relationship with the word negotiation.
Indeed.
But I'm just trying to capture kind of the Laurence back then versus the Laurence now. So would you say that you are, 20 years ago, were you very kind of nitty gritty, very, big eye for detail, maybe a little bit more on the, focused on process, and now you're more focused on the human being, kind of the holistic picture, or am I going too fast here?
I would say to a certain extent that is true. I was much more focused onto detail just because that was expected from me.
Mm,
I wouldn't say that is like my natural superpower, but I was capable of doing it, and that's also
mm,
why I was doing it, and I was being appreciated for
mm,
it. Uh, it's only very later on in my career that it felt very liberating, realizing that I don't need to do something just because other people think I'm good at it. I feel,
mm.
as in my current job as a headhunter, I make use of the skills I learned earlier on in my professional life, as a lawyer. But on the other hand, it also taps into my natural capabilities. On the other
Yeah,
hand,
yeah.
I was trained as a business lawyer. And just as you say, Aldo, to be successful as a lawyer, you need more than just legal knowledge.
Yeah.
You need to be able to do comprehensive research. You need to be able to consider various perspectives from different stakeholders. You also need to have a persistent mindset. And
Mm,
as a lawyer, you need to be able to evaluate vast amounts of information, filter out what is relevant, what is irrelevant, identify key information. And all of that is also true to a certain extent in executive search.
yeah.
But in addition, I feel now I'm much more operating in my sweet spot. They've always told me that people naturally tend to open up in my presence, and I truly enjoy when they're doing so.
Mm,
Um, but I'm also a little bit conflict avoidant by nature.
yeah.
So now I'm in a much more facilitating role rather than being an expert. And that is giving me loads and loads of energy. And I would say that maybe now that's just a different measurement of success than
Yeah.
what I would use
What are
back
you saying?
then.
Let's go back because you've basically tackled your first challenge. You were ahead of the game, Laurence, but well done. So, as your first challenge, you did indeed say that you realize that you don't necessarily need to do what other people think you
Yeah.
are good at.
Yeah.
What I find fascinating about that sentence is the other people. You wanted, you mentioned I'm conflict avoiding.
Yeah.
Would you consider yourself a people pleaser?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. So, are you upset with people after the fact? You're not upset with them in the room. So, do you relive the story after it has happened, and they say, "Well, I should have said this and I should have said that," or does it happen at the moment?
You know what, Aldo?
Yeah,
When I was 15, I had to choose between, I was in secondary school and I had to choose whether I was going to do 6 hours of maths a week or 8 hours of maths a week.
yeah,
So I chose 6 hours, and
yeah,
I called my older sister, who was back then studying to become a civil engineer, at
yeah,
the University of Ghent. And
yeah.
I informed her I had chosen 6 hours of maths, and she called me a loser. Of course,
Oh,
she had done 8 hours of maths.
yeah,
She said,
yeah,
"Oh
yeah.
my God, you're such a loser."
Oh
And
goodness. Yeah,
she was joking, but it
yeah,
hit me hard.
yeah.
And the next day, I went to the school and I changed into like a package of 8 hours of maths a week, which I regretted for 2 years. And
Yeah.
maybe that's why I didn't want to become a civil engineer, but a lawyer. But indeed, what people think of me and expect of me, it used to play a much bigger role back then
Yeah.
than it does now.
Yeah. Which is normal, right? I mean, we all need validation, specifically in the first steps of our careers,
Yeah.
right? You kind of need to be validated. You
Hmm.
want to be appreciated.
Hmm.
You go with something to a certain extent impress others, right? But it's
Yeah.
also about finding yourself. And thank goodness that we all grow in our careers, and then we end up being less people pleasers in whichever career choices we
Mm.
make, right? Yeah.
Yes, but back then, I wasn't that aware that your first job opportunity or your first role really plays a crucial role in how you develop as a professional. And
Mm.
it's not only the role or the company, but especially also the manager you have. It's
Yeah.
your first exposure to professional life and the feedback you received back then. And as you say, you're young, you're like a sponge. You absorb so many things. And I for sure, in my case, I didn't realize how important and how big the influence of that first choice is.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go to the similarities. So the similarities between being a lawyer at DLA
Mhm.
Piper and now being a headhunter, because you say there are similarities. And one of the things you mentioned is it's the research. It's kind
Yeah.
of, could you elaborate a bit on that? Because I can imagine that for a corporate contract, it's very different type of research than for the potential hiring of a
Mhm.
senior executive within an
Mhm.
organization, or is there more to it?
Mhm. Um, Absolutely. First of all, there's a lot of research to be done in both roles. Especially when it comes to law, it is your research. It's really about previous cases. What is the jurisprudence saying? What are the facts and the data about the case? While, for example, what I think people don't realize, for example, in executive search, if you start working for a new client, the first thing you will do is look what the market, the sector looks like. Who is this company? Who is the competition? How are they evolving? What has been the challenges in the past? What will be the challenges in the future? You start reading about the industry, about the newspaper, about the company, about the competitors. But you also have to start thinking about similarities, because if you want to attract right talent for that company, and for example that company is, I'm just saying, manufacturing company, very technical product, quite price competitive, then you have to start thinking, think out of the box, because people don't necessarily want to attract people from competitors. Most of the time, they don't want to do it. So
Yeah.
you really have to know, similarities. You have to be able to use your analytical thinking skills to be able to assist your client really well.
And now for your second challenge. So your first challenge, it was actually like, I needed to learn that it's not about pleasing people. It's not about the expectation of what I'm good at in the perception of others.
Yeah.
It's about what I want to do. As your second challenge, you basically indicate that your job doesn't define your identity.
Yeah.
And again, in preparation for this interview, you basically told me that twice in your career you basically needed to consider to look at alternatives, to stop your job. Once it was a choice out of love, because hey, your husband had the opportunity to work abroad for I think even 5-6 years.
Mm.
Um, so for you to start a family and to start that life, you became an expat. So you obviously couldn't be a lawyer anymore. And then the second is actually your health, because you have a heart condition, right? So let's go with the first one. So there's this moment of your husband getting this opportunity to go abroad. And I think this might sound very familiar to many people. It does to me as well. Of, okay, whose career, how are we going to do this now?
Yeah.
Take me to that moment of you deciding, okay, bye bye, big law firm. I'm going to
Yeah.
travel and follow my husband.
It's exactly as you mentioned it.
Yeah.
I was coming home from the law firm, 11 o'clock in the evening, with this pile of files in my hand. And my husband opens the door and he holds 2 glasses of champagne and some toast with foie gras at the time. And he said, "We're moving to Sri Lanka." And I was a bit like, oh,
Mhm.
flabbergasted. Of course, I knew he was in the running for this opportunity, and I knew he was dreaming of going abroad. But for me, it still was a very hard decision to make. And as you said, it was a decision out of love. In a relationship, you're with two and you have to make certain choices. It was a fantastic opportunity for him. So I swapped my life in the law firm, I would say, for daily negotiations with tuk-tuk drivers and market vendors. No, I did everything I could to stay professionally on top of my game, even to the extent that the other expat wives were asking me, why is this so important to you? I assisted in the organization of two Belgian trade missions. I got an MBA. Yet when we came back to Belgium for holidays, people would always ask me, so what do you do all day? And
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
in the beginning, the people pleaser, I hear myself, over explaining. And after a while, I got so fed up with it that I eventually started answering, nothing. I just
Yeah,
drink cappuccinos all day long. Most of the time, I even give my kids to the nannies so I can just
yeah,
hang out with my friends.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
so it's funny because now it's my job to ask people what they do.
yeah,
But in a professional context, I will hardly ever do so
yeah,
because I feel, you're a lot more than your job.
yeah,
So Sri Lanka gave me the most amazing life experience, I would say, 5 fantastic years, with our two young daughters at the time. Yet, despite all of this, I felt restless, not to have a proper job or continue to build my legal career. So, after 5 years, I returned to Belgium, to the Belgian labor market, a tremendous drive, two young children and a very small heart.
yeah,
Who would employ me? How
yeah.
was I going to compete with everyone of my age who had continued to work as a lawyer? So those were really the questions that were on my mind all the time.
I can really empathize with the torment of you having loads of ambition, being extremely productive as well, like,
Mm,
wanting to realize things, and then, going to the other end of the world, of course, still, being able to deliver and finding your way, but you know, wanting to avoid that you play the second fiddle, right? That
mm,
you're kind of, the things you do are would be irrelevant and whatever. So that is, definitely something that I think many can empathize with. Like, it's okay, it's kind of like um, you want to feel okay with making the sacrifice, but you
mm,
do need to feel okay. You need to forgive yourself, like, okay, here's what you're doing. And then doing an MBA, having two children, organizing those trade missions. So it's not that you were quietly doing nothing, having a sherry, even though you mock that, having a sherry and playing tennis. You were doing a lot. So what I'm trying to get to is what I like what you're saying is, like, it's life, right? There's a job and then there's life, and
mm,
and life is starting a family. Life is, finding each other, understanding each other in the relationship. Life is, becoming parents, finding the right homes, the right schools, finding all those things.
mm.
That's also part of what makes us successful at the end of the day.
Yeah.
What makes your husband successful and what makes you successful, right? You cannot thrive in your career if your personal situation isn't sorted, which I think is also very relevant. So I would now like to dive into the part where, so you discovered in Sri Lanka you actually had a heart condition,
Yeah.
did you not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Take me to the moment that you discovered. I mean, it must have been a very difficult experience, but how did it all start?
Basically, I was studying, taking the MBA, and when I just got up from the desk, all of a sudden I collapsed. With our youngest daughter, she was 1 year old. She was just lying next to me, and luckily, because there are no ambulances or anything in Sri Lanka, I just became conscious by myself again, and I very, very suddenly I realized that something was off. So I immediately called my husband, saying like, look, this is gonna sound really weird, but I think I just had like a heart attack or like a brain failure. And he said, well, you just need to go directly to the hospital. He was working an hour away. But I was an expat wife, so I was hosting a baby group in the afternoon, and I was expecting all these parents and children coming over, and so I didn't want to cancel that, and I just carried on. So in the evening, we had a dinner at our home, and my husband got home, and he said, "So what did the doctor say?" And I told him, "Well, I didn't go." So he sent the guests home and took me to the hospital. And
There's that people pleasing again. You like
absolutely, it's
your
in
parties.
every aspect of my life. Having a heart attack,
So no, there's a party.
still hosting a party in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And then we went to have some tests done. The doctors in Sri Lanka looked really weird, like they didn't believe what they were seeing. So we sent the results to Belgium, and luckily my father-in-law is a GP. And he told me basically to go straight into emergency care. I was there for 10 days before being repatriated to Belgium.
And so could you, if you don't mind sharing, what exactly is the ailment? So you say your heart's too small. So what was discovered then? Yeah.
Well, actually, my heart is too big.
Oh, it's
I
too
had
big.
a very small heart, but that's probably a literal translation
Oh, okay.
from Dutch.
Yeah.
That I feel very anxious about going back to work in Belgium.
Okay.
But the condition in itself is that my heart is too big.
Oh, it's too big.
So
Right.
basically, my heart doesn't have sufficient capacity to meet my body's needs. In the beginning, the condition was stable, but after a while, heart pumping had become increasingly difficult. I nearly fainted every time I was climbing a staircase, and that's what made it hard.
And so at that particular moment, your heart basically said, "This is enough, Laurence. You're doing too much."
Mm-hmm.
That's what made you faint at that moment, because your heart was too big before that moment as well. But then you discovered, like, okay, this is not sustainable.
Absolutely. So the obstructions in the heart were becoming so big that they were obstructing my blood outflow.
So they fly you to Belgium. So that must be quite a game changer. Sri Lanka to Belgium. How long of a flight is that?
It was a direct flight going to Paris that took about 11 hours. And I was in the company of a Sri Lankan emergency doctor who had like one of these mobile reanimation kits with him. So I remember, I think he was even more nervous than I was, because he was testing the machine all the time, and then it was speaking, like 3, 2, 1, back off. And
Oh, wow.
the stewards and the pilot and everybody was quite nervous. But to be honest, I've always had that confidence that everything would be okay.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. My father was diagnosed with the same condition. He collapsed when I was 13, and he had given me the example of how you can still rebuild your life and have a very rewarding and fulfilling life. So I guess at the time that really gave me the energy and the confidence that also this would fit in a certain way.
And it did. So that's the good news. But let's go back to that moment that basically a reset is required. Yet again, so the first time you follow your heart, as in your love, the love of your life, 2 wonderful children. And then the second time, not by choice, but your body tells you, okay, you need to stop, right? You
Okay.
need to
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, reset.
So
And
that actually
yeah,
came a couple of years later. So I
okay,
got
yeah,
diagnosed with this heart condition.
yeah,
But at the time, everything was more or less stable. I had to take it into account. But for me, I could still start working, that ambition was there. We were coming back to Belgium. And I must admit, in the beginning, I was a bit in denial. I had the ICD implanted and I was already applying for a job in a law firm. From the hospital, I informed them that I was in Belgium, that unexpectedly I could have this interview with them. So I only had one shot. So I was there 3 days after the surgery, after the ICD implant, with a tremendous pain in my shoulder. And I didn't even tell them
oh
that
my God,
I
yeah,
had this surgery. I just told them that I had a surgery on the shoulder.
yeah,
So there I was, performing and overperforming and going way beyond my boundaries. And eventually they offered me a job, but it was when I flew back to Sri Lanka that I realized, Laurence, this is not what you're going to do.
yeah,
You're not going back to life in the law firm. You have a responsibility towards your children, towards your husband.
yeah,
And then my friends would tell me, and towards yourself.
yeah, yeah,
So that's why I declined the offer and got my eye on a job as an in-house legal counsel at Barry Callebaut, who is the biggest chocolate producer in the world,
yeah,
And I had my final interview there with the big chief, the general counsel, and he opened the interview asking, "Who are you?" So, thinking I had to talk about what I've done, I started talking about my career path, and he interrupted me. And he said, I didn't ask you what you've done. I've asked you who you are. And, he really caught me by surprise with that question. I had to
mm.
pause, I had to give it some thought. The funny thing is, he was my general counsel, but he's now working as a headhunter. And
Oh, at all, yeah, yeah,
he went into executive search.
yeah,
And just because of that one question, I really opened up. I was still in that, the struggle of I hadn't had a proper job for 5 years, being an expat wife.
yeah,
On top of that, I had a heart condition.
mm.
And just because of his question, I was able to tell him that, I'm the kind of person who's going the extra mile for everything I do, being it as a professional, but also as a friend or as a mom, and to tell him about my resilience or to tell him about how my perfectionism would bring along great outcomes, but also great challenges. And I was also very open about the heart condition. I had learned from the previous job interview. And
Mm.
at the end of the interview, he just told me, look, if you can survive in Sri Lanka and you can survive a heart condition, you can survive at our company.
Mm.
Welcome to Barry Callebaut. And I
Yeah,
got the job.
yeah,
And he taught me such a valuable lesson, that, as we said before, your job doesn't define your capabilities.
yeah,
And also later on, when the heart condition worsened and or got worse, and I had to give up my job again
mm.
due to this factor in life. My struggle was much shorter.
Yeah.
That I had already gone through the phase where I thought that the job would be so determining
Yeah.
for who I am as a person.
There's loads of things I want to comment. First of all, the question, who are you? I had a similar revelation, but not with who are you, but with how are you? So
Mhm.
I was at a birthday party, and my cousin, who I hadn't spoken to for a long time, she asked me, how are you? And the first thing that you respond is with, how are you? I talk about, my daughter's doing fine. She's doing great at school. Wife is happy with the job. We're happy, the house is whatever. So like, I still didn't really hear how you are.
Mm,
And I basically, I'm telling you, because everything around me is doing fine, so
mm,
therefore I am doing fine, right?
mm,
So that is also kind of, I think it's a similar deflection, because it still is not an answer to how are you. It's like, but it stopped me in my tracks, because I wasn't really sure how to answer that question anymore, because everything is so determined by external factors in your life. So if everyone is doing fine, I am doing fine, right? So that's the answer, right? So and I think you had something similar, like, who are you? It's like, here's my resume from DLA, here's what I did in Sri Lanka, here's my MBA diploma, here's like whatever. It's like, this is me. It's like, no, that's not who you are. These are components of your career. It still doesn't answer who you are, similar with how you are. So I just wanted to bring that into the conversation, that it happens to me as well, like, and I think it would happen to many people that just have loads of fires to put out, right? That's, you need to juggle so many things that sometimes you just don't know anymore. You kind of forget about you, as I can imagine that you did yourself. What I like about your story is also the human factor, so that people again see through you. They see kind of the goal getter that you are, um, and they kind of say, "Hey, don't worry," because there's again this enormous people pleasing factor of, "Here's who I am," and big show kind of but already someone a lot more experienced, I can imagine, being able to kind of look behind the smoke screen and basically say, okay, uh, these qualities are more than good enough, right? So stop with the show and let's go back to the bare bones of who you are. And that
mm,
person is more than enough for this organization. Is that
mm.
also something you apply in your job? Is that also when you try to create a profile of the people that are looking for jobs? Is that what you're trying to take them to as well?
Mm, absolutely. I can see, of course, I'm working with colleagues, and you're the best headhunter when you're very true to yourself. And to me, this is an important aspect. It's not only what people have done, but why they have made certain choices. You can really, really add value for that
Mm.
person. So, to answer your question, yes, that's definitely a focus of me in my job.
Yeah. I mean, you would almost say that if people just give you kind of like a blank page of no challenges in family or health or life whatsoever, you're kind of, what's the catch here? You almost want to turn the tables here. It's like, well, it is
You
a fact of life for everyone, right?
Well,
Or for many of us. Yeah.
that's sometimes, of course,
Yeah.
it is true.
Yeah.
But when I feel I'm missing out on something or I don't get the full story yet, I just bring that to the table.
Yeah.
And that almost brings me to my third challenge. Although it's learning to bring in my gut feeling
Yeah.
in my profession as
Yeah.
a headhunter,
Yeah.
because during my whole professional career as a lawyer, I was trained to make decisions based on rational arguments. And as a headhunter, I was repeatedly told to trust my gut, but I was so afraid that my gut feeling would serve as a substitute for gathering information and
Mm.
evaluating competencies. The competencies the capabilities we talked about before, that I was trying to eliminate my gut feeling together. I thought it was so crucial to make a rational decision based on all the evidence I had in hand in order to balance any unconscious biases. But today I'm much more in touch with my gut. Gut instinct doesn't help me to know about a candidate, but it does help me in knowing what questions to ask and how to direct an interview. If a candidate, if she tells me that she's great at bringing peace in a team, yet she makes a very restless impression on me, I have learned to bring that to the table. And it's incredible how people just tend to open up and appreciate honest feedback in that respect. And they appreciate you give them to the opportunity to reflect on that. So it's not just an impression you take with you in your evaluation, but you really have a very open discussion about that.
Mhm. I think it's also what sets you apart from, the headhunters that don't do as good a job, that don't take a deep dive the way you do it, right? Because frankly, having worked in London for the better part of 10 years, you get loads of offers from people who call themselves headhunter, and then they approach you with a job that is nowhere near your skill set or experience. It's often a lot more junior, or kind of, it feels like they're not really interested. They're just looking for job matches to get the commission. And, they're kind of recruiting you, but they're commoditizing you too quickly. They're kind of thinking of you as a product, and they don't really listen to what it is that you want. They just have a job. They have an opening, and they want to fit you in that opening no matter what, right? Or they want to line you up as a candidate. Do you recognize that? Do you recognize that type of headhunter in the market? And what sets you apart?
I hear the stories.
Yeah,
Of course, I know the reputation of headhunting. That was also the reason why, in the beginning, when I made the choice to become a headhunter, I was almost a bit ashamed because, because of the reputation. And then, then somebody told me, you also have a lot of bad lawyers, but that has never stopped you from being an excellent
yeah,
lawyer.
that's true. Yeah,
So I know that that's true. I hear it from clients. I hear it from candidates. It's sometimes a reputation we have to fight to. But also there, I try to operate from a sense of confidence that
yeah,
in the long run, quality will come to the surface. And the word of mouth of candidates, it's enormous.
yeah,
People just tell me, they say, when you call me, I pick up the phone because I know it will be worth it, and it will not be a quick fix. It will be because you work with things I've told you before.
yeah.
And that's what personally keeps me going on a daily basis. And to that extent, I don't care about the others.
Yeah, no, and I think that's very good, and I like what you say about, listen, you've also got bad lawyers. Like every profession has a good and a bad version, right? So there's
Yeah.
always the worst case example and the best case example, and if there's a need, and if you genuinely help people the way you do, and I'm sure you do, then more power to you.
Yeah.
Prove the opposite and show people that there is so much value if you do it well, and if you do it properly, and you make so many people happy, right? So
Maybe
yeah.
it's even an advantage. Maybe it's easier
Yeah.
to stand out.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be as well. Yeah, no, definitely. Let's go back to that gut feeling before we go to our three very last questions. And by the way, sorry, I wanted to make a relation in case anyone who's listening would think that Laurence would lead a more quiet life and not be as productive and as focused on impact as she is. You've also written a book, or co-written a book, about negotiation. So I just wanted to see if a link could be made between following your gut and negotiating
Yeah.
by means of this book. But let's first, very quickly, for who's listening, talk about the book. So it's a book about that. Actually, we're always negotiating,
Yeah.
correct? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I told you, when I had to leave my job as a corporate counsel at Barry Callebaut,
Yeah.
I really dug into, what I had experienced in practice as a negotiator, but beyond being a lawyer. I trained as a coach and as a mediator. I started using the free up time to really dig into the fundamentals of what I had experienced myself in negotiation. So I started collaborating with Vlerick Business School. It's a well-known business school in Belgium, as you know, because you
Yes.
studied there,
I'm
Aldo.
an alumni. Yes, I am. Yes, yeah.
And I focused further on negotiation as a researcher and as a trainer. All of that, during the time where my health was really not well, and I could really do that at my own pace. So it is during that time, during my work as a researcher, I started collaborating with Professor Dr. Katja Tilleman. She's a professor in negotiation. And she's teaching the Financial Times ranked program, Negotiation as Value Creation at Vlerik Business School. Now, she developed a negotiation methodology. It's called Negotiation Intelligence, NQ, based on her research at the Vlerik Business School and at the Harvard program of negotiation. And actually, the framework of NQ provides the conceptual frame of what I had been experiencing myself in practice as a lawyer during negotiations of conflict, contracts, and labor negotiations, but also as a peer, a colleague, a partner, a mom. In today's world, we
Yeah.
spend more than 3/4 of our time negotiating. We always think about the formal negotiations, but we also negotiate with our colleagues, our partners, our children. And from that perspective, negotiation tips and tricks just are no longer enough.
Yeah.
We really need to change our negotiation behavior, our negotiation routines. And basically, the framework of NQ really helps you to develop an automatic negotiation pilot from within, whereby you negotiate with yourself, but also your mindset and your skills.
Mhm.
So when Katja, she launched the idea of writing a book testing the NQ negotiation model against the experience of foreigners in society, I did not have to think long. In my career, I had already seen so many people around me really acting as levers through which they really managed to give conversations and negotiations a completely different dimension. So Katja and I, we started asking ourselves, what can business leaders or politicians or climate negotiators, but even artists and doctors and athletes, what can they tell us about being negotiation intelligent in life? That was the question we asked, and we got the chance to interview so many interesting people. And the result will be published end of this year.
End of this year, so that's when the book comes out. The book
Yes,
isn't
indeed.
there yet; it's coming, and no, it's fascinating. Also, when you spoke to me about it, like we're always negotiating. That's true. I'm negotiating with my 4-year-old daughter as I'm negotiating with my wife about I want to go to the gym or watching watching our daughter or whatever needs to be done. But I don't realize it's negotiation, right? Because I think for me the word negotiation, it sounds like rather heavy, like you negotiate for big transactions, or you negotiate when there's conflict, or
Yeah.
that's when I really think about that word negotiation, right? Otherwise I just think about communication, right? But becoming more aware of it, looking at the why are we negotiating rather than what are we negotiating about, I think that definitely brings up for an interesting conversation.
Mm.
um, Going back to the people that you interviewed about the book, is there anyone noteworthy you would like to mention that you said, "What, hey, that was an eye opener for me as well"? Just for people who would like to read the book when it comes out.
Haha. Oh my God, we spoke to so many interesting people. We spoke to Peter Blom, the former CEO of Triodos Bank, to Hans Bourlan, the CEO of Studio 100. We spoke to Wim de Jonge, a lawyer. He's the managing partner globally of Allen and Overy. I think if I need to mention one, it would be Dirk de Wachter. He's a Belgian psychiatrist, and we approached him because as a negotiator, you often have to work with people, or you need to achieve a result together with people who really irritate you, who are just not your kind of person. You come with a history and you have that personal sense of resistance. But if you think what a psychiatrist needs to do, like let's say he has to work with a father and a son, and there has been a history of child abuse. As a person, he told me that he might have a lot of resistance to work with the father.
Mm.
But as a psychiatrist, it's his job to get to the best possible result working with that person.
Yeah.
So you might be in the same situation as a negotiator. And it's so interesting to hear that, how he approaches that, how he says, all the history I have, I try to put it at the back of my head. But actually, I really try to approach every relationship again and again with an open forehead, where I really open up to what happens in the moment, and to really listen what the other person is saying,
Mm.
and not stay in my own head, listen to my own thoughts about it.
Yeah.
And that's also what you said about, negotiation almost as a way of life. You might also be irritated by a colleague at a coffee machine, or by your 3-year-old daughter who's not hurrying up. But then if you and then we come to gut feeling. If you feel like, okay, this is irritation, this is resistance, and you develop that automatic reflex to, okay, this is resistance, this is me, I'm going to open up to the other person and yet listen to what the other one has to tell me, that is where you can really make progress as a negotiator.
Yeah. Definitely. It's not easy, but I guess you call it out for yourself. You define, okay, this is what's keeping me from actually listening, right? And if you
Mm,
know that that's a personal hurdle, then you can basically say, okay, let's get over myself. Let's get over
mm,
this personal obstacle here, or this thing that blocks me from genuinely communicating, or in your case, genuinely following your gut feeling, or whatever it is. And I think we don't do enough listening. This is also one of the reasons I started the podcast. It's like listening is not waiting for your turn to speak. It's like genuinely immersing yourself in what someone else has to say and
mm,
really acting on their story. And in our case, for Messi and Masterful, their challenges. Like, here's a career path. Here's what's happened. Genuinely listen and try to learn from it, or try to potentially act upon it. It's not
mm.
always easy, because we just have very busy lives, and it also doesn't always fit into a short 130 character tweet, or like, you can get it bite sized. Kind of some information just requires a bit more time. For that, I'm grateful that we have a medium like podcasting, or
Mm.
books for that matter, because it allows us just to take that deeper dive that it really deserves.
Yeah, and from that perspective, when it comes to active listening, I learned so much from applied arts and from
Yeah,
improvisation theater.
yeah,
At Valery Business School, you have this professor, Ralph Wetzel. He's a professor in organization and applied arts,
yeah,
and together with Lee DeLong, she's a French American comedy director. I learned such valuable theatrical techniques
yeah,
to really be present in the moment and to become a much better listener. As a performer, when you're on stage and you're doing improv, you must pay close attention to your scene partner and watch and listen. And
yeah,
it's crucial to build a meaningful interaction on stage,
yeah,
whether it's also as a headhunter or in any other
yeah,
job.
definitely. Laurence, thank you so much. We have our three standard questions, but I just have one more, specifically to you as a headhunter. You've been a headhunter for a few years now.
Yeah.
What are you most proud of?
I think in my role, it would be, I'm really part of people's lives at a turning point. Changing jobs just has a significant impact on your life. You have a lot of new experiences, for the good or for the bad. It has a financial impact. It affects your work life. And for me, it's very precious to be part of that process as a sparring partner to the candidate. I love to reflect on the impact it can have and what it can bring to people. And of course, the better you know the candidate, the more value you can add as a recruiter. And I just love going the extra mile from that perspective. For example, recently I met a young man, and he just had been extremely successful in his career for a multinational company. But to further grow within this company, it was clear that he had to take up a role internationally. But he had a child with special needs at home, making it very hard for him to make that move. And if you get that close to a candidate and you know their interests and the underlying interests, I was able to propose him a role with more responsibility, but in a smaller, very value driven company, which just meant a great win for all parties involved. And for me, that's what's getting me out of bed every morning, to have that kind of impact, I guess.
It's almost like you said it, kind of a diagnosis for him. He wasn't necessarily sure what he was looking for, but you knew kind of what his needs were beyond the job. So you also take that into consideration when
Well,
looking for the next profession.
absolutely. But it also comes with a responsibility because, of course, in the end, it's the people who make the decision themselves. You're just a facilitator. But if it turns out that a new role, it's not bringing to a candidate what he or she expected from it, and I'm doing the follow up, it's something I really take at heart, and it really keeps on playing in my mind. So for me, it also comes with a responsibility, even if you're just a facilitator.
Wow. That's a great way of saying it. And I really think good on you for really being at ease and you're kind of in that position, right? That you say, it's a podcast, but I'm looking at you and I see your eyes begin to shine because you like it so much. It's something that you're really inspired by, and you're genuinely out there to help someone, which makes it all the better, right? So that's great. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when people look at the role of headhunter, it's sometimes it comes a little bit with a sour flavor or, but there actually a whole different side to which is definitely the reason why I'm into it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. Okay, then to our very last three questions,
Okay.
questions that I ask each guest. Can you finish the following sentence for me? As a child, I wanted to become a...
Surgeon.
Oh, wow. What happened?
I know. Well, what happened? It turns out I'm extremely clumsy and I have this very annoying tremble in my hands. So maybe becoming a surgeon was not a very realistic option. But as a child, I just, in the early 90s, you will know because it was on the Dutch television. They used to broadcast these surgeries on the television. And don't ask me why I did it, but I just thought it was so fascinating. And when my older sister, she would buzz by, she would almost have this like gag reflex. But I was just sitting in front of the TV watching these surgeries. So, yeah.
Nice. But still, to a certain extent, you are. It sounds like a very human-focused profession. So maybe that's what's stuck.
Indeed, it's.
Yeah.
I guess it's about helping
Yeah.
people, fixing things in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So it definitely also has the caring aspect of it.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you for that. So, and then the next question is about reading. So we ask each guest if they have kind of throughout their career, whether there's one or perhaps multiple books or reading platforms, or it could be even a magazine that you would highly recommend to others. Do you have such a book that you
Yeah,
could think of, or such
yeah.
reading?
There are a couple that have really inspired me. Maybe two words pointing out a little bit on the same topic. A couple of years ago, I was very inspired by Sheryl Sandberg's Option B, talking about resilience and finding joy when facing adversity in life. And basically, it tells you, when option A is not available, how to kick the shit out of option B. And it was written by Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook's COO at the time. I don't know if she currently still is, after losing her husband unexpectedly. And it's just a book that was a huge inspiration to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I've read it as well. I think, and she co-wrote it with Adam Grant, who's also a great psychologist. And I remember reading it, and what I loved in the book is also the advice she gives others if something truly gruesome, or something happens to someone who is bereaved all of a sudden. And she wrote, like, just go for it, go out there, go help that person, right?
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
think too much, like, okay, it's inappropriate, or I might take my distance or whatever. No, go help that person,
Yeah.
go be
So
there for that person. Yeah,
ever since, when something happens to somebody in my environment, or
yeah,
whether I know them very well or not, I just pick up the phone and I
yeah,
just say, hey, I heard this happened.
yeah,
Can I do something for you
yeah,
today, tomorrow?
yeah.
So I took a whole different approach towards
Approach.
it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And on the same topic, last summer, I read The Choice by Dr. Edith Eger. I see your eyes shining.
Well, she was a guest on this podcast.
Was
So
she?
yes, she was. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh
She's,
my
yes,
God,
yeah,
I just enjoyed reading her book so
yeah,
much,
yeah, yeah,
as a Holocaust survivor, but as a psychologist, as a
yeah,
specialist in post-traumatic stress.
yeah,
I just love how she spreads the message that, we all come with a story,
yeah,
but we don't have to be our story or act
yeah,
as our story.
yeah.
She was victimized, but she doesn't act as a victim.
No,
So,
no.
yeah,
Yeah,
if
she's,
she's able to rise above this unimaginable trauma, I think it's something we can all learn from.
yeah. No, I mean, I think the interview that we had with her, it's now over a year ago, but I think it's one of the most profound experiences as well. Talking to
Mm,
her, and her being, she's now 95, I believe.
yeah.
But her observations, and the reason that she wrote this book, there's something very funny. She almost didn't write it because she said there's already so much out there,
Yeah.
and it wasn't until another famous professor from Stanford, who was responsible for the prison experiment, said, "Well, it's true that there are already a lot of books written, but they're all written by men."
Mm,
And that kind of shed a different light on it for her, that she said, it's true, there are not a lot of female voices on this specific topic. And
mm,
that kind of drove her to starting writing The Choice, and then later on The Gift.
yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Zimbardo is the name of that professor.
Yeah,
He
she
was
also
famous. Yeah,
describes it
yeah,
in the book
yeah,
indeed. And
yeah, yeah.
that's also, I immediately bought 3 extra copies
Oh yeah,
because when I read a book and I enjoy it, I
yeah,
really like to pass it on to somebody I think, who will really enjoy reading it as well.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
that's for the same reason I love receiving books,
yeah, yeah,
then it already makes me curious. If this person thinks it is worth giving to me, there must be something in it that is worth
yeah.
it.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So, and then just a listening recommendation for you, Laurence. Listen to our interview with Dr. Edith Eger if you're so curious. Here on Messy and Masterful. Then the last question. Now let's turn the tables. It's the Laurence Dewaele podcast. Who would be high on your list as your guest? And it
Well,
can be, sorry, before you answer, it can also be from a professional capacity. It can be anything, of course, so it's your guest, but
yeah,
it could also be kind of in line with, who inspired you professionally,
yeah.
or just, globally, generally.
Well, Dr. Edith Eger would no longer be an option as she was already in your podcast, Aldo.
No, you can definitely write to her if she wants to. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, then maybe I would go for my favorite fiction author,
Okay.
which is Haruki Murakami. I don't know
Hmm.
if you've read books of
Yeah.
him.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Um, he just has this crazy, rich imagination,
Hmm.
which is just something I love to be surrounded with. Also professionally,
Yeah.
by the way, this element of playfulness in
Yeah.
life and profession, it's very important to me.
Yeah.
And, in his book, he really explores the world in our heads and the world around us. And he kind of shifts effortless
Yeah.
between both of them.
Yeah.
And I just, in his books, you go from a complete absurdness. And before you know it, you're kind of sucked into this deep philosophical dialogue.
Yeah.
And I love it. And I would be curious. I don't know anything about him. Maybe he's super boring to listen to. Maybe that's the reason why he's writing, because he's not worth listening to.
Yeah.
But it just makes me curious, what kind of person is writing this type of books.
Yeah. He does have a very imaginative style, and it's also very grounded. I remember, like it's not overly flowery in language, but
Yeah.
it is very kind of imaginative and kind of the settings and where he's at and whatever. I recall reading something from him about running, because he's a very avid
He's a runner.
runner. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
and I read his book on running, which I really loved. It's wonderful, wonderful. Any more guests? Because I saw you thinking like maybe you had some other guests that you want, but
Well,
he's your number one?
the obvious one that would come to my head would be Barack Obama, I guess, but
Yeah.
I would be so starstruck, I would not be able to host that podcast anymore.
Okay. Well, anyways, Barack, if you're listening,
Yeah. Or Michelle.
or Michelle, anyone from the Obama team, if you're listening, we would love to interview you. So let's just put a call out there, see what comes back. What if anything. Laurence, it was a wonderful interview. Thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the best with the book, as well as with the growth of your career. Undoubtedly, we're going to hear a lot more from you. Thank you so much, Laurence Dewaele.
Likewise, thank you so much, Aldo.
If you liked this episode, then it would mean the absolute world if you could share it with your friends and or give it a short review on your preferred podcast platform. The more you share your ideas about these interviews, the more people will find out about them. So do let us know what you think. We'd be very, very grateful.
Special thanks to Philip Anderson for our beautiful theme music. This episode was edited by Natalie Piles with production assistance from Genta Metalia.